Welcome to Writers Are the Best Weirdos, the podcast starring me, Julia Roberts. I am a creativity coach, speaker, writer, and a weirdo. Aren't you? We're going to answer a lot of questions about pubbing and promoting and marketing your books, so stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome back to a new episode. We're here with Brittany Holland, the Blurb Whisperer. So if you have a blurb to write, stay tuned. Before we check in with Brittany personally, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about who she is and read her bio to you. Once upon a time, author Brittany Holland's passion for reading inspired her to pursue her dream of writing. A lover of fairy tales and hopeless romantic, pens a modern twist on happily ever after. After becoming the author, she discovered she had a knack for writing blurbs and began creating and reworking them for her author friends. They jokingly referred to her as the Blurb Whisperer, and it stuck. World traveled fast, and the rest is history. In her free time, she enjoys traveling with her family, perfecting her latte making skills at home, and binge reading her never-ending TBR. I think we can all relate to that. She can be reached at the Blurb Whisperer at gmail.com. So let's welcome Brittany Holland to the show. Thank you. Hi, Brittany.
I'm excited to be here.
It's exciting to have you. Blurb is one of those things that can flatten a really good writer. First, let's start with what the blurb is. What is a blurb?
So a blurb is just what you want to use on the back of your book or in your book description space on any book selling platforms that is going to introduce the reader to what they can find inside your book. But there are some very crucial components to making it. You want to use that space to grab the reader. So
you can also use it when querying an agent. That's kind of the same.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just basically, it's funny because I didn't even realize what it was when I started writing. I just, what's on the words on the back of the book? What is that? And so it's kind of funny once I figured it out. And it seems like a silly word, blurb, but basically it just tells readers what they're in store for and make sure that the book is a good match for them.
Okay. So somebody who writes hundreds of pages, why are they stymied by this 5-line description? Why is that hard?
So the number one thing that I have found with dealing with clients is they are too close to the story. They're in their characters' heads, or their characters are in their heads. They know their favorite color, their nuances, all of this, incredibly in-depth, emotional and physical characteristics of these characters that live in our head and we create in these worlds. And so to weed through that information and just pick out these crucial bits to attract a reader, identify a trope, create a conflict, it's hard. It's hard even for me doing my own. Sometimes I get stumped because you kind of have to be removed.
Yeah, I think you need perspective you need to shift heads.
Yeah.
So instead of a book reader, now you're talking about a book back reader, and you have to put yourself in their position. They're standing in a store and they're picking up 5 books. And what do they need to know about your book that makes it special really quickly? And they may or may not have that kind of concise ability, that convergence into a small.
Yeah.
So, okay. So what do we need to know to write our blurb? What do we start with?
So usually when I'm working with somebody, I use a series of questions, and it's very basic information. We start out, we want to know what the title is, because sometimes you want to play that in. And the next most important thing, or really maybe the most important thing, is knowing what genre or trope that you're in. You want to make sure that you're not putting a rom-com blurb on a mystery suspense thriller. You want to make sure that, just like a cover, matches the tone of what's in the book, and it visually creates something that attracts a reader, and they know what kind of covers they're looking for.
I gotta say, I think a lot of times, a lot of my clients have a hard time figuring out what genre they are. They're not necessarily writing in one of those really like historical fiction or romance or mystery genres. A lot of people, even if, like, let's say literary, which is like huge, can be all those genres but literary,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know. And it's funny story. I had went to a romance association meeting a few years back when I first started, and my friend and I went, and they go around the room and you introduce yourself and you say, what genre do you write? And it was a romance group of women. And I said, romance. And my friend's elbowing me like, you're all here for romance, but what do you write? And I'm like, I was so frozen because I thought, wow, I'm reading these different genres. I was an avid reader way before I was a writer, but it's like, oh, I didn't know that this
don't
was
separate them.
billionaire. This was, historical. I just knew that I loved romance. And so then I kind of figured out, okay, right now I'm contemporary. So that's kind of when I started. So I'm like, so that's a funny story because there's so many, and sometimes it's hard to narrow down. So usually
it's hard to know how other people and marketers think about your book. So you might just think, oh, it's a really good, funny book about kids. Can I look it up on the shelf under funny book about kids? No, I need.
No. And it's funny because then some people think like, oh, I write rom-com, but it's not really comedic. It's a little bit more maybe dry or sarcastic, or some people's, oh, I write really steamy books, or I write dark romance. We have to be careful throwing these labels around because everybody's interpretation. I mean, there is sort of a industry standard to what they kind of fit, but yeah, I mean, one person's interpretation. So what you may perceive your book as is not what an agent or a reader.
Because it's about that list.
Yeah.
The agent's buying, the agent's selling to an editor's list, and the list has to do with shelf spots they want to own, want to have writers on in their, that's all like very closely thought through from a marketing point of view. And that's jargon that we don't necessarily know. So it is hard to pick your genre, but okay. But we just talked about 52 of them, most of them in romance, but but it is useful to have somebody else look at your book and say what genre they think it is. It is helpful to really have that nailed down.
And I think some people that have a really good insight on that would be editors. Because there, especially if you have an editor who is multi-genre, and so they're going to easily be able to identify maybe this is mystery, suspense, thriller more than romantic suspense, or I think this is urban fantasy, not paranormal, and they're going to be able to kind of steer you. And your readers, if you have a reading team or ARC team or alpha, beta, whoever you have reading your stuff and giving you feedback, an author buddy is a great way to sort of, especially when you're starting out and maybe you don't have a huge editing budget to have, a proofreader and 2 editors and things like that. Swap, like get an author buddy and say, hey, I'll read yours if you read mine. And then you can kind of work through, and you're not maybe looking at it as technically, but you are picking up on some things, and you can sort of give a little more organic feedback as a reader.
Yeah. Anyway, so what's the first thing we need to know then is its title and basically genre.
Yeah. So let me grab my little list
We
here.
don't necessarily have to say the genre, but we have to know so that we're writing the appropriate.
You just want to set the tone for it.
Okay.
So we usually start, like when I have somebody fill out, I'll have them fill out the title. And if it's a part of a series, you want to keep things cohesive. I'm big about that. And I know that might come up here in a little bit when we dive a little deeper, but then genre, trope, or subcategory, any of those little things. If it's a sports book, you want to throw that in there. If it's a crime fiction, the lingo and those fun little words that you're going to use to incorporate are really going to set a sweet tone, an eerie tone, an ominous tone, hopeless romantic. So, different things like that. And then we want to introduce the conflict, internal and external, and the characters. Who are we going to be reading about? And you want to have the reader make a connection, right?
So what would that conflict sound like? A conflict sentence would sound like, let's just use something like Pride and Prejudice as a, do you know that one? Let's use one that everybody would know. What's a book that everybody would know?
So you would think about it in terms of like, for well, my opinion would be like, if you're kind of forced to be in this box and not really get to be who you want to be, or you're not free, especially at that time, you're not free to be who you are and be with who you want to be with. So a lot of times that conflict is also the trope. It's, I can't be with you because this, we can't have a happy ending. We're going to be doomed if we don't do this.
And what's the trope? What would the trope be? I don't understand what you mean by trope. What's a trope?
So, like,
I know what a trope is generally, but how are you using it in this way?
Okay, so if you were going to say forbidden romance would be kind of a trope under historical, so then we would present like, why they can't be together.
I see. Forbidden romance
or for some popular, so I'm trying to think of stuff that I've worked on kind of recently that would be in my head. If it's a workplace romance, a lot, like I would say 80% of my wheelhouse falls under the umbrella of romance. And that's
I'm hearing that. Yeah.
The fantasy and stuff. So but
that's what wheelhouse, that's what tropes you're referring to, basically. There's a lot of tropes, not just romantic tropes. There's mystery tropes like Miss Marple, Girl Detective, that kind of thing. There's fictional tropes like and
I have
girl meets boy. What else would there be? Fictional
tropes. Have like family saga, small town, coming of age stories, action and adventure stories.
These are great. Yeah, it's good to just wrap your head around them because they make life easy. I still can't figure out what mine is, but okay. I haven't heard my trope, but go ahead.
I have like, these are just some general fiction ones: human condition, self-discovery, dystopian, conspiracy. So those are kind of some different that are not necessarily within.
A new one I heard recently is cli-fi, climate fiction.
Oh, I haven't heard that one.
Right. So something happens in the climate and creates this whole environment. So, because of the, the situation we're currently in, people are beginning to write cli-fi.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that one, but I mean, it makes sense. And I feel like it definitely, and I think sometimes the more niche or specific that you get, just you're funneling down maybe to a smaller audience, but you're connecting with the readers who want specifically what you're writing, what you're selling, advertising. And, I would rather find 50 people who I know will one-click my book than be lost in a sea of 50,000 and maybe a few of them, you just don't know. So
right. I think people are always nervous to narrow down and lose people, but the better you can connect and be relevant to the person who finds you, it's a strength, not a weakness, to be smaller.
I think so too. Because then
actually once you conquer that little group, those 50 people, it'll widen naturally. Whereas if you don't conquer that, if you don't really have those avid readers, those 50 as you mentioned, it doesn't have to be 50, we're just using that same number, but that avid readership is paramount to growing your book distribution.
And when it's organic like that, then like, okay, these are going to be the people that open my newsletter, or these are the people that when I have a book there and it's up for pre-order, they're pre-ordering. We all have those authors that it's like, I don't care if they're writing how to knit socks, I'm buying it. Like, it's like, I don't care what it is. It's
the way she writes the phone book is so great.
Yeah.
That's a very old, people used to say she could write the phone book, but now we don't even have those.
I know.
But anyway, okay. So you were talking about, so I know you have in your whole theory thing 5 C's. So we've covered 2, I think, right?
Yeah. So the questionnaire, basically the questions, you just sort of figure out who the characters are, the trope, the genre, and then you sort of present that conflict. And I also usually ask personality traits of the characters when I'm writing one for somebody else, because I don't ever read the book, usually, hardly ever, when I'm doing a blurb, just because it's easier. And then I'm not in the same situation that you are, where I'm just inundated with wonderful information. Yeah. So, and then I also ask, the last thing on my questionnaire is, 5 adjectives or feelings that, you hope to convey for your story. Is it, love conquers all, or ordinary girl can, save the world, that kind of thing, like what your overall, your themes, like your
It's
undercurrent.
kind of a worldview. What is the worldview that this book presents? Like
Yeah,
if you go out of romance, worldviews might be something like good versus good overcomes evil, small people win over big people, fight the power. You end up
good
having
always
sort of a
conquers evil is a
mhm.
good one. And yeah, so it gets a little trickier when
The
you're doing.
monster's really nice.
Yeah, yeah,
If you're nice to them.
yeah, yeah.
But I mean,
So
it can be very simple. It can be very not simple, but idiosyncratic. It can be unique to the author. Something like the
like
word,
grief, like how to overcome grief, or somebody
yeah.
walks away with, what to do when you lose a child or a parent or a
Hmm.
spouse, or like you're talking about, like the climate fiction, uh love during lockdown, or feel, isolation, how to not feel so alone when you're isolated, or
Yeah.
um
Okay. There's a lot of good.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just
So you're
some
going to end up
different.
at the end giving you a five word or 10 word way to describe the point of view of your book, the message of
Yeah,
your book, right?
yeah, and the feelings, like I'm very
The feelings.
I
Because
kind
I
of
can't help
like.
but like go through my work in progress as you're saying this, which is why I'm like this.
Yeah, and it's
Well, for
funny
this
because
interview.
when I work on a blurb, and I always tell people this, I'm not just doing this from a technical standpoint. Yes, I have a list that I kind of use to work off of, and I do have some components that I think fit into every blurb. But usually it's more of a creative headspace. And so
Mhm.
like if I'm not feeling creative and I wouldn't write on my own books, I'm not working on blurbs that day either, because I want my brain to be like, I know when the door's locked and when it's not. And so I really try to utilize that. So for me, it's not just, okay, he's a police captain, or, she's a lost princess. It's like, but who are they? What do they want from life? What is their
Mhm.
backstory? Have they been wounded? What is their struggle? What are they going to overcome? Because I think at the end of the day, the flawed and, the feeling of like, they did this, I can do this too, is what really connects with readers, to see a
Mhm.
happy ending. Like this started here and there were lots of ups and downs, but now we made it. And
Yeah.
whether in any
Mhm.
that, in spiritual books, political books, romance books, children's books, I
Sure,
mean,
sure, sure, sure. I'm
just want
like
to feel
writing. I
that.
mean, I can't. That's why I keep like sort of checking out because my brain's going, "What would mine be?"
Yeah.
I hope everybody's doing that because it's inspiring what you're talking about. So go ahead.
So I came up with, sort of just, again, very organically. I use that word a lot, but that's just, I guess it works. But I came up with what I call the 5 C's.
Okay.
And so the first one is catchy. And
Catchy.
this would be your hook, whether, eye catching, attention grabbing right out of the gate at that prime real estate on your blurb, the top
Okay.
1 or 2 lines on the book or on the screen. If they're scrolling on their phone or computer, that's your hook where you just grab them.
And that would
Um,
be something like she couldn't believe he was X, or she'd never heard of Y, but now it was in her life, or what would the? I'm just trying to be catchy
yeah.
in the
So,
void.
yeah, let me think off the top of my head, like no
Right? I
pressure.
wish we had a
Uh,
book that we could continually
um,
refer to,
Let me see. Let me grab.
but one that people have heard of or something.
Um, see what I'm trying to think. Gosh, I hate to just like
Okay.
zero one out.
I mean, we can't, go ahead. We can't just, go looking for books and
Yeah, yeah. But
we're on air.
yeah, we're live. Break.
Go ahead,
No,
I'm sorry.
go to break. No, just kidding. So okay, so here's one I have. This is my fantasy romance. It's a Snow White retelling.
Okay.
So my opening line for this one is, hated for her beauty, hunted for her heart.
Okay.
So
Yes.
it kind of
there's
has a double meaning.
drama and it's brief and it's, yeah. Okay. I can hear that.
Yeah, so thinks she's ordinary. There's an evil queen that wants her heart, that needs it, that's a part of this prophecy. The huntsman is going to pursue her. He wants her heart. Then the last line of the thing is, the queen has demanded her fragile heart, but the rogue huntsman wants it for himself.
Okay. And again, there's real feeling in both those. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. Her
And-
fragile heart, rogue huntsman wants
Yeah.
her heart. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of feeling in there. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Good.
And I think like the more, and I'm really into like interwoven Easter eggs, like symbolic things. So I'm kind of a big nerd like that. So,
Yeah.
So
I
that
think a lot
was
of our listeners would call themselves nerds. So we're okay there.
yeah. I love it. That's a compliment.
Yeah, it's a compliment.
So that would be kind of like a hook or something that would maybe not just say, it's just a clever way of saying something that's
It's
basic.
really dramatic and it's really
Yeah.
short. So that,
Yeah. And it
and it
grabs.
could be, I think I was thinking when you said hook, something topical more, just because of my PR background. But
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily have to be of the moment, right?
Right. And so
That's timeless what you just read. It came out, I mean, we can hear
Oh,
that's
thank
coming
you.
from a fairy tale. Right.
yeah.
So it's not of the moment like school shootings or,
Yeah.
anything in the news kind of thing, right?
And,
Mhm.
and I'm trying to think of some other examples specifically, but I guess to give a generalized way would be things that are even blunt, like you said, like that just cause somebody to be like, wait, what? Like,
Yeah,
they
I think
did
so.
what?
That's what a hook really is.
Yeah.
I was scrolling and something hooked me and made me stop and think, made me go, what? So it has to be brief and impactful or dramatic, but I hear you. Okay, so
Yeah.
after, what was that? That was catchy. What was the next one?
That was catchy. So that's the first C. Now there are some very because the rules are really, we break the rules all the time. You do what you want. And so especially more in indie publishing, you have the freedom to break the rules a little bit more because you're setting the standards for yourself. Sometimes you can be the exception to the rule and you can throw in a hook at the end, which is like a big cliffhanger or like a mic drop moment. And you could incorporate that. A lot of people use this when they phrase it like a question, like, but will they survive? Or will he lose his head or his heart? Or, like something like that.
The podcast will be back in less than a minute. Writers, does this ever happen to you? You can't write, though you try and try. Whoa! Writer's block just knocks you down. It doesn't have to be so flinging hard. Join the Mighty Writers Club. We write together up to 5 days a week. We have a coaching and creativity training 2 times a month. You get your writing done in a community. We're with you all the way. Act now. Join us before you end up like her. Be mighty. The Mighty Writers Club. Find us at go.decodingcreativity.com/mighty.
One other thing about catchy that I'll mention is a trend that I'm seeing more so now with blurbs is people really clearly making sure that they're getting the trope or their genre or those categories, those keywords that you would use either in the body or when you enter it and when you upload your book, trying to get those in the first couple of sentences.
Right, because Google cares.
Yeah, and really then people know like, oh, this is a historical drama or this is a steampunk, this is a vampire shifter. And so instantly they know, okay, now I want to keep
like
reading.
this.
I
Right.
like this.
This is my kind.
Yeah. So then the next C is characters.
Mm-hmm.
Now who's the main players? Who are we going to meet that we're going to love, hate, laugh with, cry with, root for, wish for their demise?
Yeah.
And this could just, this could be simply names, used to on what I would consider a more traditional blurb, you would meet like, this is John Smith and he does this, and this is Jane Doe and she does this, and then this is how they meet, and this is going to be their happy paragraph. And I think now we are a lot more than a name or an occupation. We're brokenhearted, we're a single parent, we have student loan debt because we're going to nursing school. So there's a lot of ways to talk about somebody's situation without just saying, Sally's a nurse, or
Yeah, you just lost me. Right, I hear you.
Right.
So, but you could say nursing student Sally, blah, 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 or Sally's a
Yeah.
nurse who.
Yeah,
If nursing is important, nursing could just be a backdrop.
yeah, right. And
Mhm.
and that's another key thing too, is you want to make sure that the words that you are using and the things that you are telling are relevant to your story, in maybe not the central plot, but just building this little version of your character and saying, here's what I
That
have.
really seems to, yeah, just putting together enough emotional, situational, maybe
Yeah.
occupational information
Yeah,
that we care about the character.
yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
And we don't want to give away all their secrets.
No,
We
I think you
want-
only get like 3 words. Try to get
yeah,
all
so
their secrets in 3 words, or we wouldn't write books.
yeah, so we
Yeah.
want to know, like, what can we expect from them, or what are they hiding? What do we want to find out? What are they dealing with? How is this even, going to work out? And so that, I think, is when you have something that the reader can connect with your character and then already be rooting for them before they open the book. That's really powerful
Yeah, I can
to
feel
build
that.
that
Yeah.
connection.
So you do both characters, both main characters, protagonist and antagonist, or in a romance situation, the 2 main characters, right?
So sometimes, not always. Again, it kind of used to be more like that, but
Ah.
now it's more, I'm seeing a lot of like single POV, where it's like one person talking about the other person, or maybe their situation or their quest or the crime that they're solving. So it kind of depends. And sometimes when the author doesn't have a preference, we usually, as a general rule, try to make it match what's inside the book. Because if you're first person versus third, gets really tricky when some readers will only read one or the other. So you don't want to gain a reader that doesn't read your style as far as first versus third, and then they don't finish it or they give you a bad review. And you don't want to turn somebody away that, it's the opposite. Like, you want to make sure
Yeah, I
you're
hear you. So if you write in third, your blurb would be in third. If you write in first, your blurb
Yeah.
would be in first. Makes sense.
I
'Cause
mean,
you
the
got people
only
who-
time the rule breaks on that a little bit is when you have a first person book. I think it's a little bit easier to get away with doing a third person blurb. Like Heart of Glass, I wrote in first person, but when I sat down to do the blurb, it just came out in third person, a little more synopsis. But because it's a fairy tale, I wanted to narrate and sort of set the tone for both characters. But I feel like, had the book been third person, I wouldn't have done a first person blurb, because the voice, it wouldn't match, and then that might turn somebody off, one way or the other, not in a good way.
Okay, so what did we do so far?
Catchy characters. Conflict is the third one, and that's
Okay.
our climax or turning point. That's our trouble. Why won't it work? Why can't we? Why am I going to fail? Yeah. So what is the roadblock standing in the way?
Mhm.
And then again, this can sometimes relate to the trope, forbidden, forbidden situations, against all odds. It's the end of civilization as we know it. All hope is lost.
Sci-fi. Mhm.
Yeah. So that kind of just like, you just sort of like throw that out there and like, okay, now see if they get a happy ending. And so you
Mhm.
kind of getting them like, oh, well, now you've hooked me. Now I know what they're dealing with. And then now there's this, insurmountable, this like thing in their way. What's going to happen? And then we go to what my favorite part is, the creative part, or what I like to call the magic dust. So that would be our fourth C. And that is really just very well placed adjectives, is really all it is.
Okay.
It's as simple as that. Really well placed adjectives. A great, I'm like old school, so I'm always digging around in the thesaurus. But if you want something a little more at your fingertips and a little bit different, Word Hippo is a great resource for people to use. I want a word like this, and then you kind of look
Sure.
and see, and that sort of gives you some options, because you want to, just like you want to have an expanse vocabulary within your book, you really want to spice up the words that you're using on the back,
Okay.
Instead of sexy, maybe say seductive. Again, that's not, for all genres.
But what you're saying is basically you have this much space to also show people that you are an innovative writer, or that you are using interesting words. So you're going to kind of condense it and make sure that they see a couple of adjectives that, or even adverbs, I guess, even though we're not supposed to use adverbs almost ever. But
I know. Words like compelling, riveting, chilling.
Words that a lot of writers have a hard time claiming, because they feel like, oh, let someone else say that about me. And yet you have to basically say, this is a page turner. This is you have to basically say. So if you've had a lot of beta readers, you might feel more comfortable because you've got that feedback over and over again. But still, you want to say it. You have to say it. If you're not selling a book, who the heck is,
Well, and you have to think like, I'm not just posting this about myself, or I'm not like tooting my own horn on Twitter, Instagram. I mean, this is selling my book.
And this is selling my book. And selling is really, I agree.
And we shouldn't have to be ashamed of that. But I know like sometimes it does feel like, oh, it's all about the sales. I mean, no, it's not always all about the sales. That's not why I got into writing. And if it was
into writing for that, right?
Yeah, I'm not continue writing for that. But it is nice to be able to afford to cover your publishing costs and things.
Well, let's also say everybody wants to reach readers, whether or not they're paying $2, $20, or $2,000. You want to be able to reach your readers. Right. So selling is a big part. You're selling anyway. You're selling your characters. You're selling your story, all the way through. You're holding your reader's hand and selling it. Basically, he had to do it. He didn't have a choice. That's selling. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because there's still that little choice that if you wanted to, you could just go, oh, that's bullshit. He could have. And that's when you've lost your reader. Yeah. See what I'm saying? So we're already selling, we're already saying believability. We're already saying suspend your everything and go into this situation and believe this. And so that's basically the same as selling. Now we're in this blurb and believing this, and it's the same. It's the same.
It's like, go on this journey with me, but stay there. Let's finish it. Like, so that's important too. So yeah, definitely. And I think,
but I mean, and compelling is just a word. My book may not be compelling. Yours may be compelling. My book might be great, but compelling is not how I would describe it. And the reader needs to know what to expect,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think, and not even just, super adjectives like that, but even just, if it's a sports romance, and again, I'm kind of using romance as an example just because it's more fresh in my brain. If you're, saying like, well, I had a blurb that had it was a hockey romance, and it was like something about a thin line between love and hate, and like skating a thin line instead of walking a thin line. Right. Or if it's a sports romance, if somebody tackled, if there was a sneak attack, if they were a player, but now this is the game that the rules are changing. And so you're using words that are
like hockey. I think of fast paced or fast moving, and that describes the game, but it also can describe the writing. If it's accurate, it's a great one to use. And yet you might feel like, well, I think it's fast moving, but that's for other people to say. Well, guess what? You're in the position where you have to say, what is your book? What did you try for at least? And put it out there bravely, And
I had, so one of my first books, I have a blurb for, it's called Pillow Talk. And it's sort of like a modern day pretty woman, like a Cinderella story, rags to riches, fake. I guess the trope would be fake relationship, billionaire romance. He propositions her to pretend to be his girlfriend. And so on the cover, I have a guy and he's laying in bed on white sheets. And it looks like Pillow Talk is in like a red, scripty, lipsticky font. And I broke all of my own rules for this blurb. But that was before. It's like, don't read my blurbs for examples because I need to fix my own. But this one I loved and I just didn't care if it broke the rules and I wasn't changing it. And I think it says one of the lines was falling for him was never part of the arrangement. Something about and now but I did both. Now I'm totally butchering it up. I got it right here. Falling for him was never part of the arrangement. Neither was sharing his bed, but now I'm doing both. And the sheets aren't the only thing tangled between us.
Nice.
And it has guy on the cover. And then I put an example at the top, the actual definition of pillow talk: private conversations, endearments, or confidences exchanged in bed or intimate circumstances, intimate conversations between lovers. So this didn't necessarily introduce my characters and follow all those, but it had a good hook and it was creative and it was a little bit different. And in terms of like creative or being, and then cohesive is the fifth C. And this will kind of lead us into that. It's important.
But before we go away from this, the
sorry.
reason that worked without characters is because it's a known trope. We're able to provide a lot of information just by knowing billionaire romance and you know what I mean? So the reason that works is because the reader's familiar enough with that trope that they can provide a lot of information. What you're doing is saying is how that's a little different from normal. Okay.
So you kind of fill in they can fill in the blanks because we have a catch. And then we also, we know that probably there's some type of an arrangement and we know the conflict. She wasn't supposed to fall for him. Creative, it uses tangled sheets. And then so with the sheets, and the back of the book looks like white sheets. And then the cover has the guy with his arm thrown up over his head, lounging on a pillow. So we get the whole bedroom vibe. And so that works cohesive. And that's the fifth C. This is what I call the holy grail of blurb ingredients, is being cohesive. With what's inside your book on the cover, what's on the front of your book, what's on the back of your book, or what's on your inside dust jacket on a hardback. All of those things need to be cohesive, but not only within the book itself, but with your brand, if it's part of a series. It just really packages well. So a lot of times if somebody says, I want to redo my blurbs, and so I'll say okay, well, are we going to redo all of them, or do you have one, say this is a third book in the series? What do books 1 and 2 look like? Because we want to make sure that they match. And so, and that's just really important, I think, because then you're training your readers too on what to expect from you.
Well, also you're not turning off readers who liked the tone of the first 2.
Yeah. And so, and it doesn't mean that you can't shake things up or that you can't switch from this series to this series. But, if you're going to do 2 paragraphs and an ending hook, then let's do 2 paragraphs and an ending hook on all the books in that series, or an opening hook and 3 lines, or, so I'm kind of get really nitpicky in the details with making sure that it's visually cohesive and in pacing and links. 150 to 200 words is sort of the sweet spot or target. And some books, depending, if you have a 200,000 word epic fantasy novel, you're probably going to need more than 150 words to properly
200,000
introduce that on the back. 200,000. So but
I was just thinking, is that long? And then I'm like, oh yeah, that's long. 200,000 words.
Yeah. So then you would maybe need more like a 250 word blurb, maybe give it an extra 100 or 75 words. So that's so those are pretty much the 5 C's that I use. And
there's a lot of, so I believe you've sort of codified 6C, but you sort
Love it. Love it.
I mean, I believe you sort of codified how to make it feel like you, read like you, introduce what the people need to know, and deliver in a sort of really professional way what it has to deliver. So personally, for me, a blurb really is for querying an agent. But
Yeah.
and then of course, if you're self-publishing, it really goes on the book. And then you have control over all those other things, the about
Yeah.
you, and you know, you may or may not with an agent, but you are setting the tone from the get-go as to how you read. You read as a crazy, or as a fast-paced, or as a heartfelt, or as, you know, like you're starting out by
Yeah.
telling the agent even who you are as a
Absolutely.
writer, and you're not saying it in any way other than describing your book, which is what they're buying. But we know
Yeah.
that whatever they buy, you're right behind it. So this is a really cool way of making sure that who you are is really represented in those 100 words, you know, or
Yeah.
150 words, you know, that's hard.
It is. And that's sort of those like read between the lines. And that's where figuring out what you want to convey, you know, what message that they're going to be, especially when querying. And if you're not indie published, you know, so what are you going to be giving them to sell to people who,
Right?
like saying,
Yes. It
what
walks all the way through the
boxes
publishing
does
house,
this check? And
right?
where are we going to put this? Where does this fit?
But it
And
also walks through from agent to editor to sales. You know, it walks through all those departments and represents you over and over and over again. So
yeah,
it's really, you know, you really need your book to be extremely well represented from the point of view of being creative, from the point of view of knowing who your characters are, what kind of book we're talking about, but also who you are by virtue of being, like I said, any of those things: fast paced, compelling, tearjerker, page turner, you know,
yeah.
it's also your voice that's being represented. So very cool.
And I also always recommend having an editor scan your blurb or synopsis or whatever, if you're querying or if, you know, you're uploading it to Amazon or whatever, because, you know, it's so easy to have like a typo or an autocorrect or some little mistake. And you
Yes.
think like, okay, well, if I made one glaring mistake in 150 words, then an editor or somebody, you know, or an agent may think, oh, how many mistakes can we expect on this tenfold, you know?
Right.
So,
Or more to the point, it reads wrong. What does she
yeah,
mean? You know, you just go,
yeah, a
why is
misplaced
that word
comma or
action in
wrong.
there? I don't get that.
Yeah.
Or, you know, because you meant access, you know, or yeah, autocorrect in particular is devious that way.
Oh, it
Yeah.
it's
Hmm.
got me in like, usually not so much in writing, but more in like a text when I'm texting or something. And I'm
Or
like,
yeah, up social. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
always like careful. You know, I'm so paranoid. I'm always the most paranoid of hitting the laugh emoji on someone's sad post. Do you know
Oh.
what I mean? Like, I'm always afraid, like, please don't let my finger slip and seem insensitive. So, yeah,
Okay.
totally nothing to do with anything, but that's
Hmm.
part of my weirdo showing. So that just,
That's your weirdo self.
so,
Well, I mean, you seem, you seem careful and measured, and
yeah,
that's just one of the things you are. Like, that's nothing to be apologetic about, nor is it something to. I mean, I'm totally rash and crazy. You know what I mean? So like
yeah.
it's, and that works out well in different ways. You know, whatever. If I
I
hit the
feel
wrong
like in
emoji.
my personal, like, I'm more like
Hmm.
crazy, but I feel like with my business part, I'm so much more cautious than is like my norm. Just because I feel like with cancel culture, it's
Uh,
really easy to, because you know, I never want to offend anybody. So it is I'm way more cautious now. Cause I'm a like stick my foot in my mouth all day long. So I really have to
yeah.
like, let me think about this before it comes out of my mouth.
Yeah, I'm gonna stick my foot in my mouth. Well, I
Yeah.
probably did it 3 times in our interview, but you know, yeah, and I have to remain forgivable at the very least. You know, you don't want to be. Well, I think if you're basically a kind person, an inclusive person, it's hard to be canceled per se.
Yeah.
Funny or humor will often push you into a place that doesn't seem inclusive or kind. I mean, if we watch a soap
Yeah.
opera or even a sitcom, the things they say to each other, you're just like, God, if I said that, you know?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
it might be funny, but think of how much they cut each other down or whatever. It's so
That
amazing.
banter has a fine line of insult,
Yeah.
it can go insulting really
But
quick.
if you were to look at that in real life, it would be unacceptable,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. I mean, and I think that that's sort of the beauty of entertainment, I guess, is, it takes like some hard, tough subjects and, we kind of get to laugh about it and just sort of like, kind of taken out of context, um, try to bring up situations to start conversations, but
Right?
just get to, not have
And
all the,
even start heated conversations
yeah,
sometimes. I mean, yeah, you really have to run that. You have to hit that envelope edge. Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I personally learned a lot. As you can see, because I keep checking out and going, what would mine be? So I
yeah,
really appreciate that. And I think a lot of people are gonna really think hard about how those 150 words represent what their book's about, what their tone is, who they are as a worldview, what their worldview kind of is in this book. Your book kind of has one little lesson that it puts out over and over
yeah,
again, and I don't think sometimes we don't even recognize that till the end. We go, oh, I'm really here for inclusiveness, or I'm really here for, to get on cancel culture and, whatever it is.
yeah,
Those would be two
yeah,
opposites, but
for
okay.
sure.
Well,
Yeah,
I appreciate your time. I think we really appreciate your point of view on blurbs. And every single writer, even if you're not done writing, has to worry about their blurb. Blurbs starts to be very important pretty early.
yeah, and
Don't you
I'm
think?
always glad to answer questions. I see posts a lot like, I hate blurbs. I wish I could have someone write my blurb for me, or I wish a blurb writer was a real thing. And I'm like, it is me. It
It
is.
is.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, even if people don't, if they don't want to use me, or I mean, there's other, blurb writers out there, but I'm always glad to answer questions. And and if you don't know, find a group of friends and get some feedback. And there are a lot of good online groups too where people give
But
you
and use those 5 C's. So your friends
yeah,
might have some perspective, but they don't quite know the structure that you've set up here.
yeah, for sure.
That I think is really valuable. So I appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm so excited. I'm glad to be here. It was a lot of fun.
Great. All right. Thanks for talking with us.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you liked it, please subscribe and tell your friends. What did you learn today? What was your takeaway? What are you going to do today? Put it in the comments. We all want to know. Meanwhile, get my book, Write Without the Fight. You want to master your creative process so you can write with more ease and satisfaction. The links are all in the description box. Join us, because writers are the best weirdos.